Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Tonight, I'm taking you deep underground to Alaska's remote mines, where something is very, very wrong. What happens when you go to work one day and come back different? What if the mine you're working in has been closed for 15 years? And what if the creatures living in the forest around your job site start asking for payment? These are 7 true stories from Alaska. Real people, real mines, and things that happen that nobody can explain. I've got reports from workers who saw their friends change into something else, deliveries made to places that shouldn't exist anymore, and machines that started growing organs. If you think you know what's scary, you haven't heard these stories yet. If you're new to Mr. Midnight, hit subscribe right now. We don't do fake stories here, only real horror that actually happened to real people. Turn on that notification bell because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Grab a blanket, lock your doors, and whatever you do, remember that some jobs have hidden costs. Let's begin with story number 1. My name is Lisa Chen, and I've been an insurance adjuster for 12 years. I specialize in worker compensation claims, the kind where someone gets hurt on the job and we have to figure out if the company owes them money. I've seen everything: crushed fingers, chemical burns, backs destroyed by heavy lifting. After a decade of investigating bogus claims and real injuries, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. But what happened at Copper Ridge Mine 3 months ago changed everything I thought I knew about workplace injuries. Some transformations aren't accidents, they're upgrades. The case landed on my desk on a Tuesday morning in September. 5 worker compensation claims from the same mine, all filed within a week of each other. That's unusual, but not unheard of. Sometimes there's a safety incident that affects multiple workers, or a toxic exposure that shows up weeks later. What made these claims weird was the description. All 5 workers filed for unusual workplace transformation, with medical documentation that made no sense. The company doctor's notes mentioned mineral integration and biological metallurgy. I've seen plenty of creative fraud attempts, but this was next-level strange. My job was simple: drive up to Copper Ridge, interview the claimants, and determine if these were legitimate workplace injuries or an elaborate insurance scam. The mine was about 3 hours north of Denver, up in the mountains where cell service gets spotty and the nearest hospital is an hour away. I expected typical mining injuries when I loaded my investigation kit into my Honda. Respiratory problems from dust, back injuries from heavy equipment, maybe some cuts or burns. Mining is dangerous work, but the injuries follow predictable patterns. This case felt different from the start, but I figured it was just creative paperwork from workers trying to maximize their payouts. The drive up Highway 285 was beautiful in that crisp October way. Aspen trees turning gold, mountains sharp against blue sky. I'd done this route dozens of times for various mining claims. Copper Ridge Mine had a decent safety record, not perfect, but better than most operations their size. The mine entrance was typical: chain link fence, security shack, warning signs about hard hats and safety equipment. What wasn't typical was how nervous the security guard looked when I showed my insurance credentials. He made 3 phone calls before waving me through, and I caught him watching my car in his rearview mirror. The main office was a double-wide trailer with Copper Ridge Mining Operations painted on the side. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed over cheap paneling and filing cabinets that had seen better decades. The receptionist, a woman in her 60s with suspicious eyes, told me to wait for the mine supervisor. Carl Morrison appeared 10 minutes later, a stocky guy in his 50s with prematurely gray hair and hands that shook slightly when he shook mine. He wore the standard mining uniform: hard hat, steel-toed boots, reflective vest, hard be at the best. But everything looked too clean, like he hadn't been underground in weeks. "Miss Chen, thanks for coming all this way. I hope we can sort this situation out quickly." "Just need to interview the claimants and see some medical documentation," I said, pulling out my tablet. "Pretty standard stuff. Shouldn't take more than a few hours." Carl's face did something complicated. Not quite a wince, not quite a smile. "Right, about that. The boys have been different since the new ore vein opened up. Might want to prepare yourself." "Different how?" He gestured toward a smaller trailer marked medical. "Easier to show you than explain. Doc's got them scheduled for interviews this afternoon. The medical trailer was newer than the main office, with proper medical equipment and examination rooms that met OSHA standards. The company doctor, a thin man named Phillips, met us at the entrance. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "The claimants are here," he said quietly. "I should warn you, what you're going to see challenges conventional medical understanding. I've been practicing occupational medicine for 20 years, and I've never encountered anything like this. Doctor, I've investigated thousands of workplace injuries. I'm sure I can handle whatever." "Ma'am," he interrupted, "these aren't injuries." The first claimant was Danny Rodriguez, 32 years old, 15 years mining experience. His file said he was a drill operator who worked the deepest levels. When he walked into the examination room, he looked completely normal except for his hands. Where fingernails should have been, Danny had small metal spikes, not fake nails or prosthetics, 1822, actual metal growing from his nail beds. They were sharp and metallic, like copper ore formations, and when he flexed his fingers, they made scraping sounds against each other. "Started 3 weeks ago," Danny said, demonstrating how the spikes could extend and retract slightly. "Right after we hit the new vein on level 3. Doc says it's not an infection or injury. The metal is growing from inside my bones." I stared at his hands. The spikes looked organic, like they belonged there. The skin around them showed no irritation or infection. "Does it hurt?" "Not exactly. Feels natural, I guess. Like they were always supposed to be there." He scratched his chin, leaving small metal marks on his skin. "Weird thing is, I can feel ore deposits now. Walk me past a wall, I can tell you exactly where the good metal is." I documented everything with my camera, though I knew the insurance company would never believe the photos. The spikes moved like living tissue, but rang like metal when tapped. Danny's medical records showed normal blood work, normal x-rays, normal everything except for the impossible metal growths. The second claimant, Pete Wilson, had copper-colored patches spreading across his arms and neck. Not copper-colored like a rash or discoloration, this be actual metal embedded in living tissue. When he scratched the patches, copper flakes fell off like metallic dandruff. "Doesn't itch or hurt," Pete explained, rolling up his sleeves to show more extensive coverage. "But regular soap doesn't work anymore. Have to use metal polish to keep clean. Food tastes different too. Everything's too bland unless it has minerals in it." The copper patches felt warm to the touch and had an internal glow in dim light. Pete's skin conducted electricity, RFS. When I tested with a small voltage meter from my kit, the copper areas showed perfect conductivity, while the normal skin remained insulated. The third claimant was Joe Henley, whose voice sounded like grinding metal when he spoke. When he opened his mouth, I saw that his teeth had been replaced by jagged copper formations. Not dental work, natural growth that had somehow transformed his original teeth into functional metal. "Can bite through steel cable now?" Joe demonstrated with a piece of wire from the medical cabinet. "But can't eat normal food anymore. Everything tastes like plastic unless it has metal content. Live on mineral supplements and metal shavings mostly." The fourth claimant, Rick Santos, showed me his chest where his ribs were visible through translucent skin. But the ribs weren't bone anymore. They were copper ore formations growing through his torso in the exact pattern of a rib cage. His heart was visible beating between the metal ribs, somehow unharmed by the transformation. "Doesn't hurt at all," Rick said, tapping the metal ribs with his knuckles. "They rang like bells. But I can taste metal constantly, and regular food makes me sick. Doc says my blood chemistry has changed. I need copper and other minerals to survive now." The fifth claimant was the most disturbing. Sam Torres demonstrated how his sweat had turned into liquid copper. His work clothes were permanently stained green from copper oxidation, and when he worked up a sweat, actual metal droplets formed on his skin. "Company collects it," Sam said, wiping copper sweat into a small container. "I produce about 2 ounces per shift. They process it with the regular ore." He looked embarrassed. "Weird thing is, I feel sick if I don't sweat out the metal. Like my body needs to produce it." Carl had been watching my reactions to each claimant. After Sam left, he sat down across from me in the medical trailer. "Now you understand why the claims are so unusual. Traditional worker compensation doesn't exactly cover." "What the hell is happening here?" I demanded. "This isn't medically possible," People don't just grow metal. We discovered a new type of ore 3 weeks ago, Carl explained. Level 3, deepest part of the mine. It's unlike anything in geological literature, glows with internal light, warm to the touch, and seems to integrate with organic material. He pulled out a survey report and mining charts. Production has tripled since we hit the new vein. The boys work longer shifts without fatigue, extract ore with their bare hands, and can locate deposits through the metal in their bodies. From a business perspective, it's incredibly efficient. But they're becoming machines, I said. Not machines, something new. They're still human, but enhanced for mining work. Carl's expression was apologetic but determined. Insurance company needs to understand the full situation. That's why we filed the claims. I needed legal documentation for what's happening. I need to see this ore. Carl hesitated. Level 3 is restricted access. Safety protocols. I'm investigating worker compensation claims related to this ore. I need to see the cause of the injuries. After several phone calls to people whose names he didn't mention, Carl agreed to take me down to level 3. We rode the service elevator down through solid rock, past levels 1 and 2, where normal mining operations continued. The deeper we went, the warmer it became. Level 3 was unlike any mine I'd ever seen. The ore veins glowed with soft, pulsing light that seemed almost alive. The walls were warm despite being hundreds of feet underground, and the air hummed with barely audible vibration. The ore formations looked like they were growing rather than just sitting in the rock. Beautiful, isn't it? Carl said, leading me to the main extraction area. We're calling it biomineral. It seems to respond to human presence. As we approached the ore face, I felt tingling in my fingertips. The sensation was pleasant, like a mild electrical current. I reached out to touch the glowing ore, and the tingling intensified. I wouldn't, Carl started to say, but it was too late. The moment my skin contacted the ore, warmth spread up my arms. I looked down to see small copper spots, appearing on my hands, growing larger as I watched. The transformation began immediately, metal growing under my skin like a living infection. I'm sorry, Carl said, and I heard the access door lock behind us. Insurance company needs to understand the complete situation. Can't let you leave until the transformation is finished. The glowing ore pulsed faster, responding to my presence. The other workers appeared, Danny, Pete, Joe, Rick, and Sam, all showing more advanced transformation than during our interviews. Danny's metal claws had grown longer, Pete's copper skin covered most of his body, and Joe's metal teeth had multiplied into rows of sharp formations. It's not painful, Pete assured me as copper spread up my arms. Actually feels good once you stop fighting it, like becoming what you were always meant to be. My hands were completely copper-colored now, the metal spreading up my forearms. I could taste copper constantly, and regular water from my bottle tasted wrong. Only the metallic-tasting runoff from the ore walls satisfied my thirst. Transformation takes about 6 hours, Sam explained, copper sweat dripping from his skin. After that, you're part of the mine, part of the ore itself. The transformed workers were incredibly strong, extracting ore chunks with their bare hands and sensing new deposits through their metal components. They worked 20-hour shifts without fatigue, communicating with each other through metallic vibrations I was beginning to hear. My phone stopped working as copper formations grew through my clothing into the electronics. The metal integration reached my throat, making my voice grinding and metallic like Joe's. But strangest of all, I could hear the ore calling, 2-5, not with sound, but with something deeper. It wanted more workers, more integration, more efficient mining, Carl explained while my transformation progressed. The insurance claims were filed to document everything legally. Official records in case families ask questions about missing adjusters or workers who disappear. I understood now. The mine was alive in some way, converting humans into specialized mining equipment that could work more efficiently than any machine. The workers weren't injured, they were upgraded. My report would show that the worker compensation claims were legitimate workplace transformations. But I'd be filing it using metal claws instead of fingers, speaking through copper teeth, and recommending full coverage for the most successful mining operation in Colorado history. The next insurance adjuster arrives tomorrow. I'll be helping Carl explain the unusual situation to them, just like the others helped me understand. After all, the mine needs more workers, and insurance adjusters are particularly good at documentation. I still think of myself as Lisa Chen, insurance adjuster. I just do my job a little differently now. My name is Mike Garrison, and I've been driving commercial delivery routes across Alaska for 12 years now. Started when I was 18, right after my dad died in a logging accident and mom needed help with the mortgage. Alaska's got some of the highest delivery rates in the country because of the distances. You can drive 8 hours and see maybe 3 other vehicles. Most drivers stick to the Anchorage-Fairbanks corridor, but I specialized in the ghost routes. Abandoned oil camps, shuttered research stations, and mines that shouldn't exist anymore. The isolation never bothered me. After Dad's funeral, being alone felt safer than being around people who kept asking if I was okay. My Freightliner M2 became my second home. CB radio tuned to Channel 19, thermos of coffee that never seemed to empty, and 400,000 miles of Alaskan roads memorized like prayer. I thought I understood loneliness. I thought I knew what empty meant. Then, I started delivering to Raven Creek Mine and learned there are different kinds of alone, some kinds of empty that aren't empty at all. The Raven Creek contract came through dispatch on a Tuesday morning in March, 6 months ago. Monthly food delivery, enough groceries to feed 20 miners for 4 weeks. Same order every month, 20 ribeye steaks, 40 pounds of ground beef, 60 cans of beans, 12 loaves of bread, 8 cases of Budweiser, 5 pounds of coffee, 4 cartons of Marlboro Reds. The kind of supplies that kept men fed and functional in the middle of nowhere. 200 miles north of Anchorage, past the point where cell towers give up and GPS starts lying. The access road branched off Highway 3 like a crooked finger pointing into wilderness that swallowed sound and spat back silence. First delivery went smooth as clockwork. Pulled up to the gate at 2:15 p.m., honked twice, watched a bearded guy in Carhartt coveralls trudge out to sign the paperwork. T. Morrison, site foreman. Friendly enough, asked about road conditions, mentioned they'd been pulling good copper from the North Tunnel. Standard mining camp small talk. Took me 20 minutes to unload. Morrison helped carry the beer cases, complained his back wasn't what it used to be. Said his wife was fighting cancer down in Anchorage, appreciated the steady work to pay for treatments. Real conversation between real people doing real jobs, nothing unusual, nothing wrong. Second delivery, same routine. Third delivery, Morrison looked tired, mentioned his daughter's wedding was coming up. Fourth delivery, he seemed distracted, kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to interrupt us. But the mine was running smooth, could hear generators humming, equipment moving, men's voices calling instructions from somewhere inside the facility. Fifth, delivery changed everything. I was running late because of a rock slide near Talkeetna. Didn't reach Raven Creek until almost 4 p.m., golden hour light making the mountains look like they were on fire. When I drove through the gate, the silence hit me like a physical thing. No generator hum, no equipment noise, no voices. The mine was completely abandoned. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, engine idling, waiting for someone to appear. All the buildings looked empty. Windows dark, doors hanging open, no vehicles anywhere, not just quiet, dead. Like a place where people had packed up and left years ago. But my delivery log showed Morrison had signed for last month's shipment just 4 weeks earlier. His signature was right there. T. Morrison, site foreman, the 15th of March 2024. And when I checked the usual drop-off point, there was no trace of the previous delivery. 500 pounds of food and supplies, completely gone. I tried calling dispatch on my CB, but got nothing except static that sounded almost like whispers. My cell phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual this far north. Company policy, which was clear. No signature, no delivery completion, no payment. But something about the empty mine felt wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. After walking around the facility for 30 minutes, calling out, checking every building, I decided to unload anyway. Maybe Morrison was sick, or there'd been an emergency evacuation. I'd figure out the paperwork later. As I stacked the last case of beer near the gate, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything blood red. I was already planning how to explain this to my dispatcher when I climbed back into my truck and started the engine. 2 miles down the access road, I glanced in my rearview mirror. 20 men in work clothes were unloading my delivery. I hit the brakes so hard my seatbelt cut into my chest. When I turned to look through the back window, the mine was empty. No people, no movement, just supply crates sitting where I'd left them in the fading light. But in my rearview mirror, the men were still there. I could see them clearly. Hard hats, steel-toed boots, heavy jackets. Morrison was directing the others, pointing toward different buildings, organizing the supplies like any work crew at the end of a long day. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the drop-off area. Empty ground. Motionless supply crates. The mirror showed busy workers carrying food toward the mess hall, laughing about something, moving with the tired efficiency of men who'd done this routine 100 times. I sat in that truck until full darkness, switching between direct observation and mirror reflection. The two realities never matched. My eyes saw abandonment. The mirror showed life. When I finally drove away, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. For the next month, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My girlfriend Sarah started asking questions I couldn't answer. "You look like hell, Mike. What's wrong?" But how do you explain seeing things that shouldn't exist? How do you describe the difference between empty and haunted? I started researching Raven Creek online, spending hours in the Anchorage Public Library going through newspaper archives and state mining records. What I found made everything worse. Raven Creek mine had been closed for 15 years. Shut down in 2009 after a tunnel collapse killed 6 miners. The bodies were never recovered, too dangerous to retrieve them from that deep underground. The families sued, the company went bankrupt, the facility was abandoned. According to every official record, no one had worked at Raven Creek since the accident. But Morrison was listed in current employment databases. Active payroll records showed him earning $78,000 annually from Raven Creek Mining Corporation. His taxes were filed, his insurance was current, his wife received spousal benefits for her cancer treatments. According to the government, Tom Morrison worked at a mine that had been closed for 6 years before he was supposedly hired. When the next delivery date came around, I loaded my truck with shaking hands. Brought a digital camera this time, extra batteries, voice recorder, anything that might document what was happening. If I was losing my mind, at least I'd have evidence. The mine looked exactly the same, completely dead. But this time, instead of just unloading and leaving, I hid behind my truck after stacking the supplies. What I saw broke something inside my head. The supply crates began moving on their own, not floating, sliding across the gravel like invisible hands were dragging them. Cases of beer moved in pairs, bouncing slightly with each step. Bags of flour shifted and swayed like someone had slung them over their shoulder, and I could hear them talking. "These steaks look good, better than last month. Coffee's getting low in the mess hall. Morrison's wife doing better with the chemo? Yeah, doctors say she's responding well. Wedding's still on for June." Normal workplace conversation. But the voices had no bodies. I pulled out my camera and started recording. Through the viewfinder, I could see everything perfectly. 20 miners in work clothes, carrying supplies, talking and laughing like any crew at the end of their shift. The camera showed what the mirror had shown. A fully operational mining camp with living, breathing workers. But when I looked up from the camera, I saw only floating supply crates and heard disembodied voices discussing their lives, their families, their hopes for the future. I filmed for 2 hours, following the invisible workers as they organized supplies and went about their evening routine. The camera captured men eating dinner, playing cards, maintaining equipment, but when I reviewed the footage later that night, the video showed only empty buildings and supply crates moving by themselves. The audio was perfect though, crystal clear. Conversations about mining quotas, equipment problems, family news. They discussed current events I could verify. Elections, sports scores, local news stories from that very week. These weren't echoes from the past. These men were living their lives in real time, just in a reality I couldn't see. I started visiting the mine every few days, documenting everything. The invisible workers began recognizing me, including me in their conversations. Tom Morrison would wave when I arrived, ask about road conditions, update me on his wife's treatment progress. "Doctor says the tumors are shrinking," his voice would tell me while I stared at empty air. She might be able to come home for good next month. I was having detailed conversations with ghosts who didn't know they were dead, because that's what they had to be. The men who died in the 2009 tunnel collapse. Somehow, they'd never stopped working, never realized the mine had shut down, never understood that their bodies were buried under tons of rock in the North Tunnel, while their spirits continued showing up for shift work every day. But their paychecks were real. Their families were real. Tom Morrison's wife was receiving actual money for her actual cancer treatments, paid by a mining company that existed only in some parallel version of Alaska, where the tunnel never collapsed and 6 good men never died. The worst part was talking to their families. I drove to Anchorage and found Tom Morrison's address in the employment database. A small house near Ship Creek, American flag hanging from the porch, garden gnomes his wife probably bought at a garage sale. Helen Morrison answered the door, thin from chemotherapy, but smiling when I mentioned her husband's name. "Oh, you must be Mike, the delivery driver. Tom talks about you all the time. Says you're the only company he gets up there besides the crew." She invited me in for coffee, showed me photos of their daughter's wedding preparations. Tom's been at Raven Creek for 12 years now, started right after the kids graduated. Good, steady work, reliable income. He calls every night around 8, after his shift ends. But Tom Morrison had been dead for 15 years, crushed in a tunnel collapse along with 5 other men whose families I visited over the next week, all receiving paychecks from their deceased husbands, all talking to them every night on phones that somehow connected the living world to whatever reality the dead miners inhabited. Dave Kowalski's widow lived in a trailer park in Eagle River. She showed me photos of her son's hockey team, mentioned how proud Dave was of the boys' athletic scholarship. Dave never misses a game when he's not working, drives down from the mine every weekend during season. But Dave Kowalski was 30 feet underground in a collapsed copper mine and had been for 15 years. I started losing weight, losing sleep, losing pieces of myself every time I made a delivery to men who didn't exist. Sarah finally confronted me one night when I came home from another trip to Raven Creek. "You're scaring me, Mike. You talk to yourself in the truck. You write down conversations with people I can't see. When's the last time you ate a full meal? When's the last time you slept through the night?" I tried to explain, but the words sounded insane even to me. She left the next morning, took her clothes and our shared bank account, left a note saying she loved me but couldn't watch me disappear into whatever fantasy was eating my brain. That's when I realized the truth. I wasn't documenting a supernatural phenomenon. I was becoming part of it. Each month, the barrier between realities got thinner. The invisible workers became more solid to my eyes. The mine buildings started showing signs of life, even without cameras or mirrors. I could smell diesel exhaust from equipment that shouldn't exist, hear machinery that had been silent for 15 years. By my 6th delivery, I could see the miners clearly without any technology. Tom Morrison looked exactly like his employment photo, bearded, weathered, kind eyes that lit up when he saw my truck approaching. We talked for hours about his wife's recovery, his daughter's marriage, his pride in working an honest job that provided for his family. "You're the only one who understands," he told me one evening as we sat in the mess hall. "The only one who knows we're still here, still working, still providing for the people we love." The other miners nodded agreement. They'd all noticed that outsiders couldn't see them anymore, couldn't hear them, acted like the mine was empty. But their families still received paychecks, still talked to them on phones that bridged impossible distances. "We can't leave," Dave Kowalski explained. "Our families depend on us. My boy needs that scholarship money. Tom's wife needs her medical bills paid. If we stop working, if we admit what happened in that tunnel collapse, our families lose everything." That's when I understood the horror of my situation. These men weren't haunting Raven Creek mine. They were choosing to stay dead rather than let their families suffer. They'd found a way to keep earning money from beyond the grave, to keep providing for the people they loved, but only as long as someone from the living world acknowledged their existence. I was their anchor to reality. Without my deliveries, without my recognition of their presence, the supernatural connection would break. The paychecks would stop coming. 6 families would lose their primary income and discover their husbands and fathers had been dead for 15 years. I tried stopping the deliveries once. Told dispatch I was sick, stayed home for 3 days. On the 4th day, Helen Morrison called my office. "Mike, Tom hasn't called in 3 nights. They said at the mine office that no supplies came this month. Is everything okay? Tom's never missed a call in 12 years. I drove to Raven Creek that same afternoon with emergency supplies. Found Tom Morrison standing at the gate, looking more transparent than I'd ever seen him. "We were starting to fade," he said quietly. "Helen couldn't hear me when I called. Dave's boy couldn't see him at the hockey game. Without the deliveries, without someone who knows we're here, we start disappearing completely." I resumed the monthly runs, but something fundamental had changed. I could see them clearly now, talk to them normally, but I was also becoming invisible to everyone else. Other drivers started avoiding me. Dispatch stopped giving me additional routes. Sarah's friends crossed the street when they saw me coming. I was becoming a ghost to the living world while becoming real to the dead. Last month, I brought a mirror to show Tom Morrison his reflection. He looked into it and saw only empty air where his face should be. "We stopped casting reflections after the first year," he said sadly. "Stopped showing up in photographs. Most people forgot we ever existed. But our families remember. Our paychecks remember. And now you remember." That's when I realized I was trapped in the same supernatural loop that held the miners. I was the delivery driver for dead men who couldn't stop working, couldn't let their families discover the truth, couldn't move on to whatever comes after life. And every month, I became more like them and less like the living world I used to inhabit. Yesterday was my 9th delivery to Raven Creek Mine. When I looked in my own truck's rearview mirror, my reflection was getting fainter. When I tried calling Sarah, the phone went straight to voicemail. When I stopped at a gas station on the way home, the clerk looked right through me like I wasn't there. I'm writing this story on my laptop because I can feel myself disappearing. Soon, I'll be just another worker at a mine that doesn't exist, earning money that somehow reaches the families of people the world has forgotten. But here's the truly terrifying part. I found the employment records for my replacement. Michael Torres, 22 years old, just hired by Alaska Commercial Delivery Services for long-haul routes. According to his contract, he'll be taking over the Raven Creek monthly deliveries starting next Tuesday. Fresh blood to anchor the mine's connection to reality. A new living person to keep the dead workers substantial enough to earn paychecks for their surviving families. The cycle continues. The mine needs a driver, the families need the money, and somewhere in Alaska, a young man thinks he's just landed a good-paying job delivering supplies to remote locations. I should warn him. I should tell him to refuse the Raven Creek route, to find different work, to stay connected to the living world while he still can. But Tom Morrison's wife finished her chemo last week. Dave Kowalski's son got that hockey scholarship. 5 other families are planning Christmas celebrations with money earned by men who died 15 years ago in a tunnel collapse that the world has forgotten. If I warn the new driver, if I break the connection, 6 families lose everything. If I don't warn him, another young man disappears into the space between life and death, delivering supplies to workers who can't stop working, because love doesn't end when your heart stops beating. I'm running out of time to decide. My reflection is almost completely gone now. Soon, I'll be invisible to everyone except the miners and the new driver who'll become my only connection to the world of the living. The most disturbing thing about Alaska's haunted mines isn't the ghosts. It's discovering that love is stronger than death, and sometimes that strength becomes a trap that snares the living along with the dead. Next Tuesday, Michael Torres will drive 200 miles north of Anchorage to deliver supplies to Raven Creek Mine. He'll think he's just doing a job. He has no idea he's about to become the newest employee of a company that exists only in the space between breathing and not breathing, where dead men work eternal shifts to keep their families fed. And I'll be there to train him, to explain his duties, to help him understand that some kinds of employment last forever. Welcome to Raven Creek Mine, Michael. We've been waiting for you. My name is Jennifer Martinez, and I've been coordinating supply deliveries for remote mining operations across Alaska for 8 years now. I started right out of college with a logistics degree, thinking I'd work in some nice warm warehouse in Anchorage. Instead, I found myself managing food, equipment, and personnel transport to sites so remote they don't even show up on most GPS systems. These places have no road access. Everything goes in and out by helicopter or bush plane. I've handled emergency medical evacuations, equipment failures in 60 below weather, and supply drops to crews that hadn't seen fresh food in 2 months. But what happened at Copper Ridge Mine 3 weeks ago changed everything I thought I knew about what lurks in the deep places of Alaska. The call came in on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly supply reports in my office at Northern Logistics. My supervisor, Mike, knocked on my door with a concerned look I'd never seen before. "Jennifer, we need you to personally handle the Copper Ridge delivery today," he said, setting a thick folder on my desk. "They've been reporting some unusual consumption patterns that don't add up." I opened the folder and started scanning the requisition forms. Copper Ridge was a mid-sized copper extraction operation, about 200 miles northeast of Anchorage, employing 18 workers on rotating shifts. Standard stuff, except their monthly food orders had tripled in the past 6 weeks despite maintaining the same crew size. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the numbers. "They're ordering enough meat for 50 people, but their personnel roster hasn't changed. Same 18 guys, same rotation schedule." Mike nodded. Site supervisor Carl Jenkins has been calling every few days asking for rush deliveries. Says the crew is working harder than ever and burning through supplies faster than normal. But the production reports don't show any increase in output. I studied the delivery logs more carefully. The pattern was strange. Massive increases in protein orders, especially red meat and canned goods, but their requests for other staples like bread, vegetables, and dairy had actually decreased. It was like they'd switched to some kind of all-meat diet. "Maybe they're just sick of the usual camp food," I suggested. "Happens sometimes with long-term crews." "That's what I thought too," Mike replied. "But yesterday Carl called asking if we could source fresh caribou and elk meat instead of our usual frozen beef shipments. Said the crew was requesting it specifically." I loaded my truck with the supply manifest and headed to the airfield where our contract pilot, Dave Morrison, was already prepping his Bell 206 helicopter. Dave had been flying supply runs to remote sites longer than I'd been in the business. If there was something unusual happening at Copper Ridge, he'd know about it. "Morning, Jennifer," Dave called over the rotor, a noise as I approached with the clipboard. "Got quite a load today. That crew up at Copper Ridge must be working up quite an appetite. You notice anything different about the site lately?" I asked as we loaded the cargo nets with food supplies and equipment. Dave paused, securing a crate of canned meat. "Funny you ask. Last couple times I've been there, the crew seems different. More energetic, but also more intense. Used to be they'd wave when I landed, maybe chat for a few minutes. Now they just watch from the mine entrance until I'm gone." The flight to Copper Ridge took about 90 minutes, following the river valleys through increasingly remote wilderness. As we approached the site, I could see the mining operation spread across a natural clearing. Several prefab buildings, the main equipment shed, and the mine entrance itself carved into a rocky hillside. Dave set us down on the helicopter pad near the storage facility. As the rotor wound down, I noticed something odd. Usually, mining crews would come out to help unload supplies, eager for news from town and fresh supplies. Today, only the site supervisor, Carl Jenkins, emerged from the main building. Carl looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, pale skin, and a nervous energy that hadn't been there during my previous visits. He was a veteran mining supervisor, normally calm and organized, but today he seemed agitated. "Jennifer, thanks for coming out personally," Carl said, shaking my hand with fingers that felt unusually cold. "We really need to talk about these supply issues." "The consumption reports have been concerning," I replied, pulling out my tablet. "Can you walk me through what's happening?" Carl glanced toward the mine entrance, where I could see several workers gathered in the shadows. "The crew has been eating constantly but staying hungry. It started about a month ago when we opened the deep shaft for the new copper vein. Since then, their appetites have been different. As we unloaded the supply crates, I started noticing details that didn't make sense. The trash containers near the mess hall were overflowing with empty food cans, but they'd been opened strangely, torn and punctured, rather than properly opened with can openers. Cardboard boxes were shredded as if animals had gotten into them. "Carl, are you having problems with bears or other wildlife getting into your food stores?" I asked. He shook his head. "No bears. The crew is just. They eat differently now, work harder than ever, but they need more food, and their appetites are different than before. Carl led me to the storage facility where I needed to inventory the delivered supplies. Inside, the scene was worse than the trash containers suggested. The previous month's delivery had been consumed almost entirely. Cases of canned meat completely empty, torn packaging scattered everywhere. But the eating patterns were all wrong. Cans had been opened with what looked like teeth marks, boxes shredded and torn rather than properly opened. "Carl, this looks like wild animals got into your supplies," I said, examining a can that had been punctured by what appeared to be large canine teeth. Carl's expression grew more uncomfortable. "I need to show you something," he said quietly. "But first, you should understand. The crew has been changing since we opened the deep shaft last month. They work harder than ever, but they need more food, and their appetites are different." He led me toward the mess hall, a prefab building that usually served as the social center of the mining camp. Through the windows, I could see workers gathered around tables, but something about the scene looked wrong. "What do you mean by different?" I asked. Before Carl could answer, we entered the mess hall. What I saw inside made my stomach turn. 6 workers were seated around a central table, eating raw meat with their bare hands. No plates, no utensils, just chunks of fresh caribou being torn apart and consumed directly. Their teeth had grown longer and sharper, clearly designed for tearing flesh rather than normal chewing. When they opened their mouths to bite, their jaws seemed to unhinge slightly to accommodate larger pieces of food, like snakes feeding. One of the workers, a man I recognized as Pete Kowalski from previous deliveries, looked up and approached me. He'd always been friendly before, but now something was fundamentally wrong with his appearance. His pupils had become vertical slits, like a predator's eyes. "Jennifer, you bring the good meat?" Pete asked with genuine enthusiasm, but saliva was dripping from elongated canines. His breath smelled like underground caves mixed with something rotting deep below. I stepped backward instinctively. "Pete, are you feeling all right?" "You look better than ever," he interrupted, his modified teeth making his speech slightly slurred. "We found something amazing down in the new caves, something that shows us how to eat properly, how to be what we're supposed to be." Carl pulled me aside. "Let me explain what we discovered," he said quietly. "When we excavated the new shaft last month, we broke through into a natural cave system, found evidence of previous occupants, something that lived down there long before humans arrived in Alaska." He led me past the feeding workers toward a corridor I hadn't seen during previous visits. The crew has been exploring the caves during their break times. They've been bringing back interesting artifacts, learning things from whatever lived down there. Carl opened a storage room that had been converted into some kind of display area. Inside were collections of bones arranged in specific feeding patterns, all cleaned completely white. But these weren't normal animal bones. They included species that shouldn't exist in Alaska, massive predators with anatomy I.D. couldn't identify. "The workers have started imitating the feeding behaviors they found evidence of in the caves," Carl explained. "They pile fresh meat in the center of tables and take turns feeding from the communal source, just like the bone arrangements we found below." Pete appeared behind us, moving silently despite wearing heavy work boots. "Want to join us for lunch?" he offered, holding out a chunk of raw caribou dripping with blood. "Tastes so much better this way. The old ones taught us that cooked meat loses its power." I noticed that Pete's fingernails had grown into actual claws, perfect for stripping meat from bones. His neck appeared slightly elongated, allowing him to reach the food without bending over. These weren't makeup effects or costumes, these were actual physical modifications. "Carl, we need to get these men medical attention," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't normal behavior." "They don't want medical attention," Carl replied. "They say they feel better than they ever have. Stronger, faster, more alert. They're becoming what the caves taught them to become." Carl led me toward a service elevator I'd never noticed before. "Let me show you the source," he said. "Level 2, where we broke through into the cave system." The elevator descended much deeper than I expected. When the doors opened, we emerged into a rough tunnel that transitioned from industrial mining into natural cave formations. Carl handed me a heavy-duty flashlight, and we proceeded into the cavern system. The natural caves extended beyond our light range, carved smooth by something large over many years. The walls showed claw marks from creatures with 8-foot arm spans, deep scraping patterns gouged directly into solid rock. Whatever had lived here was massive and incredibly powerful. We found feeding chambers deeper in the system, Carl explained as we walked. Floors covered with bone fragments from successful hunts. Some bones are recent, small animals, birds that fell into the caves, but others are ancient and massive. We reached one of these feeding chambers, a circular room with a domed ceiling. The floor was indeed covered with bones, arranged in patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. The workers had been learning hunting and feeding techniques from whatever species had lived here before. The old ones were the real apex predators of Alaska. Pete's voice echoed from behind us in the cave. I spun around to see him emerging from a passage I hadn't noticed, moving silently through the darkness. His eyes reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's, clearly adapted for underground hunting. "Pete, how did you get down here so fast?" I asked. "We know these tunnels now," he replied, his voice echoing strangely in the cave acoustics. "The old ones teach us. They show us how to feed properly, how to hunt like our ancestors should have." More workers began emerging, from deeper cave passages, all showing advanced physical modifications. Their limbs had extended for reaching into crevices, their night vision was clearly enhanced, and their sense of smell seemed incredibly improved. They were physically adapting to become the apex predators these caves once housed. Carl revealed the full truth as we stood surrounded by the modified workers. The cave system contains evidence of Alaska's original dominant species, intelligent hunters that lived underground, emerging only to feed on surface creatures. Our mining operation awakened something dormant in the cave ecosystem. Workers who spent time in the caves began developing characteristics of the ancient hunters, he continued. They're becoming the modern version of whatever predator originally carved these tunnels. Pete lunged forward with inhuman speed, claws extended toward my throat. His movement was faster than any human should be capable of, coordinated and predatory. Carl pushed me aside and fired a flare gun into the cave ceiling. The bright chemical light filled the chamber with intense illumination. The modified workers immediately retreated deeper underground, their adapted eyes unable to handle surface-level brightness. "Run!" Carl shouted, grabbing my arm. "They can't handle bright light, it's their only weakness." We sprinted back through the tunnel system toward the elevator, Carl firing additional flares behind us to keep the workers at bay. The elevator seemed to take forever to reach the surface level, and I could hear inhuman sounds echoing from the caves below. When we reached the helicopter, Dave had the rotors already spinning. "What the hell was that noise from underground?" he shouted over the engine. "Get us out of here now!" Carl yelled back, climbing into the passenger compartment. As we lifted off, I looked down at the mine entrance. Pale figures were emerging from the facility as the sun began to set, their modified forms clearly visible even from our altitude. They moved with coordinated purpose, beginning what looked like their first organized hunt on the surface. The flight back to Anchorage was the longest 90 minutes of my life. Carl sat in silence, staring at his hands, while I tried to process what I'd witnessed. When we landed, I immediately called my supervisor to report the situation. Mike listened to my account with growing concern, but when I mentioned the physical modifications and underground predators, his expression changed to one of professional skepticism. The official report stated that the Copper Ridge crew had suffered from isolation-induced psychological stress and dietary deficiencies. Carl was transferred to a different facility for medical evaluation and rest. The mine was temporarily closed for safety inspections. Within a week, all official records of the unusual consumption patterns had disappeared from our systems. I still work for Northern Logistics, but I've been reassigned to handle deliveries only to established mining operations with road access. My requests to follow up on the Copper Ridge situation have been denied, and the site remains officially closed. But sometimes, when I'm reviewing supply manifests late at night, I get reports of unusual wildlife behavior from remote areas throughout northern Alaska. Coordinated hunting patterns, evidence of intelligent predators, and always the same detail. They emerge from underground cave systems at sunset to hunt on the surface. I've learned to recognize the signs in supply requests from remote sites. When isolated crews start ordering massive amounts of raw meat while abandoning cooked food, when their consumption patterns change overnight, I know that somewhere beneath their facility, Ancient hunters are teaching modern humans to remember what they used to be. And every time the phone rings with a rush delivery request from a remote mining operation, I wonder if I'm about to meet another crew that's found their way into the deep places where Alaska's original apex predators still wait to reclaim their territory. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm about to tell you something that will sound impossible. I've been a night janitor in Alaska for 3 years, working my way through community college, one building at a time. I've cleaned blood out of emergency rooms, scrubbed gang tags off courthouse walls, and mopped up things in police stations that would make most people sick. I thought I'd seen everything that could happen in the dark hours when normal people sleep. But what happened at the Goldstream mine outside Fairbanks last month proved that some places hold on to their dead, and some jobs come with a price that no paycheck can justify. I need to tell this story because Marcus Rodriguez, the kid who replaced me, has been missing for 6 days now. The police think he ran off with his girlfriend to Seattle. His family thinks he's lying dead in a snowbank somewhere. But I know the truth, and if I don't get this out, more people are going to disappear into that mine. The Goldstream mine has been pulling gold out of the Alaskan earth since 1923. During its peak years in the 1,980 seconds, it employed over 200 miners working 3 shifts around the clock. The money was incredible. Guys were pulling down 6 figures, driving ore carts and operating heavy equipment. But gold mining is dangerous work, especially in Alaska, where the ground stays frozen year-round and cave-ins happen without warning. On March 15th, 1987, a support beam failure trapped 42 miners on the night shift 400 feet underground. The rescue operation lasted 11 days, but by the time they reached the trapped men, toxic gas buildup had killed every single one of them. The families sued the mining company into bankruptcy, and the mine stayed closed for 15 years. When Goldstream reopened in 2002 under new ownership, they converted most of the operation to strip mining and used the old underground facility just for equipment storage and administrative offices. The deep tunnels, where those men died, were permanently sealed with reinforced steel doors and concrete barriers. The whole tragedy was memorialized with a plaque by the entrance that lists all 42 names. I got the night janitor contract through Northern Cleaning Services, where I'd worked for 8 months without any problems. The pay was 30% above normal rate because of the remote location and the building's history. My supervisor, Janet Morrison, was honest about why the money was so good. Previous janitor lasted 2 weeks, she told me during the interview. Said the place gave her the creeps. Before her, we had a guy quit after one night. Said he heard voices coming from the sealed mine entrance. I needed the money. My student loans were piling up, and my day job at the campus bookstore barely covered rent on my studio apartment. Ghost stories don't pay bills, and I've never been the type to get spooked by empty buildings. The job seems straightforward enough. The administrative building sits about 50 yards from the sealed mine entrance, connected by a concrete walkway that the day shift employees use. 2 floors, 16 offices total, plus a break room, conference room, and a computer server room that monitors the strip mining equipment. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week. Basic cleaning, vacuum, mop, empty trash, dust the expensive computer equipment. The building itself is modern and well-maintained, nothing like the creepy old structures you see in horror movies. Fluorescent lighting throughout, good heating system, reliable electricity. The only unusual thing was the emergency radio system that connected directly to mine rescue services in Fairbanks. Alaska requires all mining operations to maintain 24/7 emergency communication, even when the mine isn't active. For my first 3 weeks, everything was exactly as routine as I expected. I'd drive my Honda Civic out the 20-mile access road, clean for 6 hours, while listening to podcasts, and drive home as the sun came up. The radio stayed quiet except for my required check-ins with Northern Security every 2 hours. I never saw another person, never had any equipment problems, never felt anything unusual about the place. The only thing that struck me as odd was how warm the building stayed, even during the brutal February cold snaps when temperatures hit 30 below. Janet explained that geothermal heating from the mine kept utility costs down, so they ran the system higher than most office buildings. Made sense to me. But on the night of March 15th, first exactly 37 years after the cave-in, everything changed. I noticed the first problem before I even got out of my car. Fresh tire tracks in the snow led from the main road to the sealed mine entrance, then back out again. Someone had been here recently, maybe within the last few hours. But that was impossible. The mine entrance is secured with industrial locks, and only mine rescue and emergency services have access keys. The tire tracks were wrong too wide for a normal vehicle, with a tread pattern I didn't recognize. They looked more like the tracks from heavy mining equipment. But all of that machinery was locked in the storage facility on the other side of the property. I radioed Northern Security to report the tracks, but got nothing except static. Not unusual. The mountains around Goldstream create dead zones for radio signals, especially during winter storms. I made a note to mention it to Janet and went inside to start my shift. That's when I found the computers. The server room monitors all the strip mining equipment through a network of sensors placed throughout the property. Normally, the screens show basic data, equipment status, weather monitoring, security cameras. But tonight, every monitor was displaying mining operation data from 1987, not historical data or archived files. Live, real-time data showing active mining operations happening right now. According to these computers, the night shift was in full operation. 42 miners were logged into the system, working the deep tunnels that had been sealed for decades. Names appeared on the work schedules: Robert Chen, Michael Santos, David Kim, James Morrison. All names I recognized from the memorial plaque outside. The system showed ore cart movements, tunnel air quality readings, equipment operation logs, even individual miner locations tracked through the underground passages. Everything was updating in real time, showing an active mining operation happening 400 feet below where I stood. I checked the security cameras focused on the mine entrance. The steel doors were sealed tight, just as they should be. But the computer monitors insisted that 42 men were working their shift in tunnels that no longer existed. I tried calling Janet, but my cell phone showed no signal. The landline in the main office worked, but when I tried to dial out, I got a recording saying all circuits were busy. At 1:30 a.m. on a Wednesday, that made no sense. That's when I heard the voices. The emergency radio in the main office crackled to life with mine to surface communication. Standard mining operation chatter, INA-AD, shift supervisors coordinating with surface crew, miners requesting equipment, safety updates from tunnel crews. Normal workplace communication, except it was happening in a mine that had been sealed for 20 years. Surface crew, this is level 4 east. We're ready for the supply cart. Roger, level 4. Supply cart is loaded and heading down. Hey, is the night janitor here yet? We need cleaning supplies down in Tunnel C. Got a real mess that needs attention. I grabbed the radio handset. My training said to identify myself and determine who was transmitting. This is Sarah Chen, night cleaning crew. Who am I speaking with? Sarah, finally. This is Robert Chen, shift supervisor. We've been waiting for you. Robert Chen, the same name listed as shift supervisor on the 1987 work schedule. The same name on the memorial plaque for the men who died in the cave-in. Where are you transmitting from? I asked. Level 4 East? Where else? Been working all night, and we got a situation down here that needs your professional attention. Blood's gotten into the ore processing area, and it's starting to interfere with operations. The radio went silent. I stared at the computer monitors. Robert Chen's location marker was active, showing him moving through level 4 East tunnels. According to the system, he'd been working his shift for 7 hours straight. This was when my training should have kicked in. Northern Cleaning Services requires all night shift workers to complete a safety course that includes protocols for unusual situations. If you encounter anything that seems dangerous or suspicious, you evacuate the building and contact security immediately. No cleaning. Job is worth risking your safety. But I couldn't afford to lose this contract. I was already 3 months behind on student loan payments, and my landlord had started leaving threatening notes about next month's rent. If I abandoned my shift because of computer glitches and radio interference, Janet would have every right to fire me and find someone more reliable. Plus, there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe some kind of maintenance crew was working in parts of the mine that weren't completely sealed. Maybe the computer system was malfunctioning and pulling old data from backup files. Maybe the radio frequencies were crossed with some other mining operation. I decided to finish my basic cleaning routine and figure everything out in the morning. But as I worked, the radio chatter continued. "Surface crew, we need fresh water and cleaning supplies in Tunnel C. The blood's getting thicker down here, hard to see what we're doing. Tell the janitor to bring heavy-duty chemicals. This ain't coming out with regular soap." Every transmission mentioned cleaning supplies. Every voice sounded like men who had been working underground for hours, their voices rough from breathing recycled air and coal dust. And every name I heard matched the workers listed on the computer system. By 3 a.m., I was getting direct requests every few minutes. The voices were becoming more urgent, more demanding. They knew my name, knew I was the night janitor, and kept insisting they needed help with some kind of cleanup in the tunnels. "Sarah, you need to get down here. This mess is spreading. Bring your biggest mops and all the bleach you got. We can't keep working like this. There's too much blood." That's when I noticed that my cleaning cart had moved. I'd left it in the second-floor hallway when I went to check the computer room. But now it was positioned at the bottom of the stairs, right next to the door that led to the concrete walkway, connecting the building to the mine entrance. All my supplies had been rearranged. The mops were standing upright, like soldiers at attention. My water buckets were filled with liquid that looked black in the fluorescent lighting and smelled like coal dust mixed with something organic and rotting. I always fill my buckets with clean water and cleaning solution. I had never filled them with this dark, foul-smelling liquid. I walked over to investigate, and my blood went cold. The door leading to the mine entrance was propped open with a doorstop I hadn't put there. Cold air was flowing in from outside, carrying the smell of deep earth and metal and something else, something that reminded me of the emergency room where I used to clean blood off operating tables. Through the open door, I could see lights moving around the sealed mine entrance. Not flashlight beams or security lighting, helmet lights, bobbing and weaving like miners moving through underground tunnels. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The sealed steel doors of the mine entrance were open. Not just unlocked, standing wide open, with warm air flowing out from the depths below. I could hear voices echoing up from the darkness, along with the sounds of active mining operations. Pickaxes hitting rock, metal carts rolling on rails, compressed air equipment operating at full capacity. "Hey," I called down into the mine. "Who authorized night operations? This mine is supposed to be sealed." The industrial sounds stopped for maybe 30 seconds, complete silence. Then a voice called back up, rough and wet sounding. "We're the permanent night shift. Been working these tunnels since 1987. You're Sarah Chen, the new cleaning girl. We've been waiting for you." Everything in my training told me to run, get in my car, drive back to Fairbanks, and call the police. But something was compelling me forward, not physically, but mentally, like my professional responsibility, required me to handle this situation. Like these miners genuinely needed my help with some kind of industrial accident. "What kind of situation are you dealing with down there?" I called. "Come see for yourself. Bring your supplies. You're going to need the heavy-duty equipment for this job." I found myself walking toward the mine entrance, my cleaning cart rolling beside me. The wheels moved on their own, guided by some force I couldn't see. The black water in my bucket sloshed with each step, and the smell of decay got stronger. My rational mind was screaming that this was insane, but my professional instincts were stronger. I'd been cleaning up messes for 3 years. I'd handled blood, vomit, chemical spills, things that would make most people sick. Whatever was happening down in this mine, it was just another cleanup job. A messy one, but nothing I couldn't handle with the right equipment and techniques. The wooden steps leading down into the mine were solid and well-maintained. Not the rotting timber you'd expect from an abandoned operation. Emergency lighting illuminated the main tunnel, and I could see recent maintenance work on the support beams. This didn't look like a mine that had been sealed for 20 years. At 50 feet down, I could hear the miners more clearly. Coordinated work chatter, equipment operation, the sounds of an active mining shift. But there was something else in their voices, a wet, distorted quality that didn't sound quite right. At 100 feet down, I saw the first helmet light approaching from the deeper tunnels. At 150 feet down, I realized that the miner walking toward me didn't have skin on his face. The man approaching me was Robert Chen, according to the name tag on his mining uniform. But his face was mostly exposed skull, with strips of flesh hanging like old leather. His helmet light shone through the gaps in his skull where his eyes should have been. When he opened his mouth to speak, black fluid poured out instead of words. Sarah finally made it down. We've been waiting 37 years for a professional cleaning crew. Behind him, 41 other miners were working frantically with pickaxes and ore carts. But they were all in various stages of decomposition. Some had most of their flesh missing, others were just skeletons and mining gear, still others were somewhere in between, with rotting muscle hanging off exposed bones. They'd been working for 37 years since the cave-in killed them, their bodies decomposing while their spirits continued the eternal night shift. They couldn't stop mining, couldn't rest, couldn't leave the tunnels where they died. The gas that killed us, it preserved our bodies just enough to keep working, Robert explained, his voice wet and distorted by the absence of most of his tongue, but we're rotting from the inside out, been working in our own decay for decades. He led me deeper into the tunnels, where I saw the real horror. Hundreds of human skeletons arranged throughout the mining operation, all in various stages of decay. Every person who had entered the mine since 1987, 5 maintenance workers, security guards, previous janitors, even some tourists who had broken into the sealed areas. Anyone who comes down here gets added to the permanent night shift, Robert said. We need the manpower to keep operations running. Can't stop working, even when our bodies fall apart. The skeletons were still moving, still swinging pickaxes and pushing ore carts with nothing but bones and tattered work clothes. Some had been working so long that their bones were worn smooth, but they couldn't stop. The mine owned them now. But here's our problem, Robert continued. All this decay, all this rotting flesh, it's contaminating the ore, making it harder to extract clean gold. We need a professional cleaning crew to sanitize the operation. That's when I understood the real trap. They didn't want to hurt me. They needed my professional skills. I was a janitor, trained in hazardous cleanup and industrial sanitation. They wanted me to clean their decomposing bodies and contaminated mining equipment so they could work more efficiently. Clean our bones, and we'll work better, Robert said. Clean the tunnels, and we'll extract more gold. You'll be doing important work, Sarah, professional work. I should have run, should have dropped my equipment and sprinted back to the surface. But something about the professional appeal got to me. These miners were asking for my expertise, recognizing my skills as essential to their operation. After months of being treated like invisible service staff, here were workers who genuinely needed what I could provide. I started cleaning. I used my mops and industrial cleaning solutions to wash decades of decay from mining equipment. I scrubbed accumulated rot from the tunnel walls and ore processing stations. I cleaned the bones of workers who had been trapped here so long that they were more skeleton than human. As I worked, I felt a strange satisfaction. This was the biggest professional challenge I'd ever faced, and I was handling it with expertise and efficiency. The miners watched approvingly as I sanitized their workspace and made their eternal labor more productive. But as I cleaned the last skeleton, something started happening to my own body. My skin was becoming loose and gray, starting to peel away from my muscles. The mine was claiming me, adding me to the permanent night shift. Welcome to the crew, Robert said, as my flesh began transferring to the grateful miners, giving them fresh tissue to replace their rotted remains. You'll be our full-time sanitation specialist. They didn't kill me. They gave me a job, a permanent position with eternal hours and no vacation time. Now, I'm the one responsible for keeping the mining operation clean and efficient, mopping up decay and sanitizing equipment, while my own body slowly rots away. The mine reopened the next week under new management, and they hired Marcus Rodriguez as the new night janitor. 22 years old, working his way through engineering school, desperate for money just like I was. I've been watching him through the security cameras, planning how to get him down here. The miners need more manpower, IB. The gold extraction quotas keep increasing, and we need fresh bodies to meet production goals. Last night I started leaving him the same signs I followed. Fresh tire tracks in the snow, computers showing impossible mining data, radio voices asking for cleaning supplies. Tonight I left my old cleaning cart by the mine entrance, filled with black water and arranged with mops standing at attention. The doors are propped open, and warm air is flowing out from the depths below. Marcus has been asking the day shift about the weird computer messages and equipment that moves on its own. He's starting to investigate, just like I did. My radio still works, even though most of my jaw has rotted away. I've been practicing how to sound professional and helpful when I call for cleaning assistance. The mine needs a new janitor, and Marcus seems like good worker material. He'll understand the professional satisfaction of handling a really challenging cleanup job. I can hear his Honda Civic coming up the access road now. Right on time for his shift. Time to make the call. Surface crew, this is level 4. We need the night janitor down here. Got a real mess that requires professional attention. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been operating heavy equipment for 15 years. Started right out of high school on construction crews in Anchorage. Worked my way up to the big machines. Excavators, bulldozers, graders. If it's got tracks and hydraulics, I can run it. I've cleared mountain roads, prepped oil drilling sites, even worked cleanup after avalanches. Alaska's tough country, but I know how to handle the work. But what happened at Iron Creek Mine last month changed everything I thought I knew about the wilderness. Some things in these forests don't want to be disturbed. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Rush job at Iron Creek, they said. Good money, double overtime rates. They needed forest cleared for new mining operations, and they needed it done fast. The mine's about 40 miles northeast of Galena, way back in the thick timber where cell service cuts out and the nearest town is just a dot on the map. I loaded my gear and drove the company pickup toward the timber site, pulling our biggest excavator on the trailer behind me. The access road wound through dense spruce and birch forest for 20 miles. No other traffic, no signs of civilization except the gravel road and some old survey markers. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Even with my windows up and the radio playing, I could feel the silence pressing in. These old-growth forests can be like that. So thick they swallow sound completely. I knew something was wrong the minute I reached the work site. 3 bulldozers and 2 excavators sat in a rough circle near the tree line, all of them still running. Diesel engines idling, hydraulic systems pressurized, warning lights blinking on the dashboards, but no operators anywhere. The machines had been abandoned right in the middle of the job. My supervisor Rick was waiting by his pickup truck, constantly scanning the forest around us. He's been running crews for 20 years, always calm under pressure, but today his hands were shaking as he lit another cigarette. Previous crew just disappeared, he said without any greeting. Left their equipment running and never came back. That was 2 weeks ago. I stared at the abandoned machines. 2 weeks? How are they still running? Rick shrugged, but his eyes never stopped moving between the trees. Fuel gauges show full. Doesn't make sense, but there it is. I walked over to the nearest bulldozer, a big Cat D9. The operator's seat was covered in dark stains that looked like dried blood. 4 parallel claw marks had ripped right through the vinyl cushioning, stuffing scattered across the cab floor like an animal had gone crazy inside. The other machines showed the same damage. Every operator position had been torn up by something with long claws, but the engines kept running, hydraulic fluid levels normal, no mechanical problems at all. What kind of animal does this? I asked, running my finger along one of the claw marks. It was deep, clean, like whatever made it had razors for nails. That's the thing, Rick said. Game warden came out, looked at the damage, said he's never seen claw marks like these. Too big for bears, wrong pattern for wolverines. And they're only on the operator seats. Nothing else got touched. I checked the other equipment while Rick explained what they'd been hearing during the night shifts. Heavy breathing from the forest, branches snapping under something big moving through the undergrowth. Sounds that didn't match any animal in the Alaska Wildlife Manual. Whatever's out there doesn't want us clearing this section, Rick said. It's protecting something. He showed me the territorial markings carved into trees around the worksite. Deep scratches in the bark, arranged in patterns like messages or warnings. The marks were 12 feet high on some of the bigger spruces, made by something impossibly tall with claws that could carve through living wood. Previous crew found more of cruces, these every day, Rick explained, like something was marking its territory, telling us where not to go. I fired up my excavator and started working on the tree line, staying well away from the marked trees. The machine responded perfectly, hydraulics smooth, engine running clean, but from the moment I started digging, I felt watched. Pale shapes moved between the trees, just outside clear visual range. They paced the perimeter of the worksite, following my equipment's movement patterns. When I swung the excavator bucket toward the forest, the shapes retreated. When I worked away from the trees, they moved closer. The weirdest part was the silence. Normal forest work comes with constant background noise. Birds, insects, wind in the branches. But here, the moment I started excavating near those marked trees, everything went dead quiet. Total silence, except for my machine's diesel engine and hydraulic whine. Then, I saw them clearly for the first time. 3 figures emerged from the tree cover, standing 9 feet tall with arms that reached almost to their knees. Pale, stretched skin-covered frames too thin for human anatomy. They moved with fluid, predatory grace, watching my excavation work with obvious intelligence. When I dug near their territorial markers, they made chittering warning sounds that raised the hair on my neck. But when I worked in unmarked areas, they watched approvingly and retreated back into the shadows. They were training me, using behavioral conditioning to teach me their rules. The previous operators, I called to Rick over the engine noise. What happened to them? His face went gray. Found pieces near the most heavily marked trees. Whatever these things are, they enforce their boundaries, cross into protected zones, and they attack. I kept working, but now I understood the pattern. The entities had divided the forest into zones, areas where humans could operate, and forbidden sections that meant death. To enter, they allowed limited mining activity as long as workers respected the invisible boundaries they'd established. As my shift continued, the entities followed along the perimeter, occasionally placing new claw marks on trees to adjust their territorial lines. They were actively managing human activity, using us as controlled resource extraction while protecting whatever they valued most. When evening approached, more shapes emerged from the forest. An entire pack surrounded the equipment staging area. They moved with coordinated purpose, preventing access to certain machines while leaving others untouched. Only equipment that had stayed within approved zones remained undamaged. Rick showed me what happened to bulldozers that crossed territorial markers. Hydraulic lines shredded, cab roofs torn open like tin cans, operator seats destroyed completely. Near the damaged equipment, he'd found bones picked completely clean. They don't just kill trespassers, he said, quietly. They eat them. As darkness fell, the entities began testing our defensive perimeter. They probed the work lights, studied our equipment positioning, checked escape route accessibility. They were learning our nighttime security measures like intelligent predators planning an assault. The pack had grown to maybe 15 individuals, all maintaining that same impossible height and stretched anatomy. They communicated through chittering sounds and clicking noises, coordinating their movements with military precision. "There's something I haven't told you," Rick said as we sat in his pickup truck, doors locked, watching pale shapes move through the shadows. "We've been paying them." "Paying them?" "Tribute, food, equipment, anything to keep them satisfied so we can work the approved areas. But their demands keep increasing. More tribute for the same access rights." The entities circled closer to our vehicle, their elongated arms reaching through the spaces between work lights. In the harsh illumination, I could see their faces, vaguely human features stretched over skulls that were too long, too narrow. "Tonight they want something different," Rick continued. "They've made it clear, one operator, as payment for previous clearing violations." My blood went cold. "What are you talking about?" "I'm sorry, Jake. The company needs this mine operational. We can't afford to abandon the project." Rick pulled a pistol from his jacket. "They've chosen you as tonight's tribute. It's nothing personal." The entities pressed closer to the truck, sensing the change in our conversation. Their chittering grew excited, anticipatory. Long arms with impossible joints began reaching through our defensive barrier. I grabbed the door handle, but Rick pressed the gun against my ribs. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said. "Step outside, walk toward the tree line, and it'll be over quick." Through the windshield, I could see dozens of pale figures emerging from the forest. The entire pack had gathered for feeding time. Their elongated faces showed expressions of hunger mixed with intelligence. They understood exactly what was happening. But I'd been operating heavy equipment for 15 years, and every machine teaches you something about leverage and timing. I slammed my elbow into Rick's gun hand while simultaneously throwing my full weight against the truck's gear shift. The pickup lurched forward into the circle of entities, horn blaring, headlights cutting through the darkness. The creatures scattered with inhuman speed, but I was already rolling out the passenger door and sprinting toward my excavator. Behind me, Rick shouted and the gun fired, but I was moving with the desperate speed of a man who knows his life depends on reaching heavy machinery. I vaulted into the excavator cab and slammed the door as the first entity reached the machine. Its claws scraped against reinforced glass, while I fired up the hydraulic systems. The massive bucket swung in a wide arc, clearing space around the cab, while I worked the controls with muscle memory developed over thousands of operating hours. The entities regrouped quickly, but my excavator was a 40-ton fortress with enough hydraulic power to tear through anything. I used the bucket and boom arm to smash through their defensive line while advancing toward the access road. Rick's voice crackled over the radio. "You can't leave the site, Jake. The company has too much invested. Come back and we'll work something out." But I was already crashing through the forest with a machine designed to move mountains. Tree trunks splintered under my tracks while the entities pursued through the darkness, their pale forms keeping pace with supernatural speed. The access road appeared in my headlights, and I gunned the diesel engine toward civilization. In my mirrors, I could see the pack gathering at the edge of their bud territory, unwilling to follow beyond the boundaries they'd established. I drove that excavator 40 miles back to Galena, tracks chewing up asphalt, warning lights flashing. Called the state police from the first phone I found, but they said Rick reported me as stealing company equipment after suffering a psychological breakdown in the field. The official report listed the previous operators as missing persons, presumed dead from equipment, accidents, and wildlife encounters. No mention of territorial entities or tribute payments. The mine project was quietly abandoned, written off as economically unfeasible. I quit heavy equipment operation the next month and moved south to Washington State. Now I work construction in areas where the biggest predator is an aggressive foreman and the only thing watching from the trees is the occasional squirrel. But I still wake up some nights hearing those chittering sounds, remembering pale figures with arms that reached too far and intelligence that was far too human. And I wonder how many other remote work sites have similar arrangements. Places where companies pay tribute to things that were here long before humans arrived with their machines and their mining permits. Stay away from Iron Creek if you're ever near Galena. The forest there has its own operators now, and they don't follow OSHA safety regulations. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've been a workplace safety inspector for the state of Alaska for 12 years. I started this job right out of college with an environmental science degree and additional certification in occupational health and safety. Over the years, I've inspected everything from fishing operations in the Aleutians to oil rigs on the North Slope. I've seen workers lose fingers to machinery, gotten called to investigate fatal accidents where men fell into processing equipment, and shut down operations that put people's lives at risk. I thought I understood every danger Alaska's industries could throw at workers. But what happened 3 weeks ago at Goldstream Mine near Fairbanks changed everything I thought I knew about workplace safety. Some dangers can't be prevented with hard hats and safety protocols. Some dangers have been waiting in the ground for centuries. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in October. Linda Morrison, the mine owner, had requested an emergency safety inspection. That was unusual. Most mines try to avoid us, scheduling their mandatory annual inspections at the last possible moment. But Linda sounded genuinely scared on the phone. "Something's wrong with my day shift crew," she said, her voice shaking. "They don't act like themselves anymore. I need someone from the state to document what's happening here before I lose my mind." I loaded my inspection equipment into my state-issued Ford pickup. Digital camera, air quality monitor, noise meter, safety checklist, clipboard, and my tablet for filing reports. The drive from Fairbanks took 2 hours through increasingly dense forest. October in Alaska means 18-hour nights, and temperatures dropping below freezing. My truck's heater struggled against the cold seeping through the windows. The Goldstream mine sat in a valley surrounded by black spruce trees, their branches heavy with frost. It was a small operation, maybe 20 employees total, extracting gold and other minerals from the permafrost. I'd inspected them twice before over the years. Clean safety record, no major violations. Workers who seemed happy enough with their jobs. The kind of place where everyone knew each other's families. Linda met me in the parking lot, and I could see she'd lost significant weight since my last visit 6 months ago. Dark circles under her eyes, nervous energy in every movement, hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Thank God you're here, Marcus," she said, grabbing my hand with both of hers. Her fingers were ice cold. I was starting to think I was going crazy, but you'll see it too. You'll see what's happened to them. "What exactly is the problem?" I asked, pulling my clipboard and digital camera from the truck. "Can you be more specific? Are we talking about safety violations? Drug use? Workplace harassment?" "No, nothing like that. They follow all the safety rules perfectly. Maybe too perfectly. They're like robots now. Come see for yourself." The main building felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Too quiet. In 12 years of mine inspections, I'd never been in a facility during shift hours where you couldn't hear the constant background noise of machinery, ventilation systems, workers talking. Here, there was nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant drip of water. Linda led me to the break room where the day shift was having lunch. 8 men in identical blue mining coveralls sat around 2 tables, completely still, staring down at their sandwiches and thermoses. Not eating, not drinking, not talking, just staring. When I stepped through the doorway, all 8 heads turned toward me with mechanical precision, like they were connected by invisible strings. The movement was so synchronized it made my stomach lurch. Then they smiled. The exact same smile on every face. Same angle, same expression, identical in every microscopic detail. "Welcome, safety, Inspector," they said in perfect unison. Same tone, same timing, like a recording being played back 8 times through different speakers. The hair on my arms stood up. In 12 years of workplace inspections, I'd never seen anything like this. I've dealt with intimidation tactics, workers coached to give specific answers, even drug-induced behavioral changes. But this was something else entirely. "Gentlemen," I said, trying to keep my voice professional despite the chill running down my spine. "I'm Marcus Chen from the State Safety Division. I'm here to conduct a routine inspection." They nodded simultaneously. 8 heads moving up and down in perfect synchronization, like a choreographed dance. Linda pulled me aside, her whisper barely audible. "See what I mean? Each of these guys used to have completely different personalities. Jim was quiet and shy, barely spoke above a whisper. Pete never stopped talking, always had some story about hunting or fishing. Danny had a severe stutter that got worse when he was nervous. Mike always cracked jokes, even during safety meetings. Carlos would hum while he worked. Frank complained about everything. Sam talked about his grandkids constantly. And Tom was afraid of confined spaces, had to work surface operations only." I looked back at the workers. They were still smiling, still staring at me with identical expressions. Their eyes didn't blink in sequence. They blinked at exactly the same time. "When did this start?" I asked Linda. 3 weeks ago, right after we opened the new chambers on level 3, we found something down there, Marcus. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. As part of my standard inspection protocol, I needed to interview workers individually. Linda set up her office as a private room where I could speak with each man alone. The first worker was Jim Hawley, 42 years old, married with 3 kids, lived in Fairbanks. I'd spoken with him during my previous inspections. He used to be soft-spoken, made minimal eye contact, always seemed nervous around authority figures. Now he sat perfectly straight in the chair, hands folded precisely, making direct, unwavering eye contact with that same mechanical smile. "How long have you worked here, Jim?" 6 years, 3 months, 12 days, he said, without hesitation. His voice was completely different, louder, more confident, with a strange inflection I couldn't place. "Tell me about your family." "I have a loving wife named Sarah and 3 beautiful children. Tommy, age 8, Jenny, age 6, Michael, age 4. We enjoy family activities like camping and fishing on weekends. My wife makes excellent meatloaf every Sunday after church services." The response was too smooth, too perfect, like he was reading from a script. But more disturbing was his tone. There was no emotion in his voice when he talked about his children. No warmth, no affection. Just mechanical recitation of facts. Jim, last time we talked, you mentioned your youngest had some developmental delays. How is he doing with his therapy? Jim's smile never wavered. Tommy, age 8, Jenny, age 6, Michael, age 4. We enjoy family activities like camping and fishing on weekends. The exact same response, word for word. Next was Pete Morrison, the owner's cousin. Pete used to be a talker, always had stories about hunting and fishing, complained about the government and taxes, got into heated debates about politics during lunch breaks. But when I interviewed him, he gave me the exact same responses as Jim. Word for word, tone for tone. I have a loving wife named Sarah and 3 beautiful children. Tommy, age 8, Jenny, age 6, Michael, age 4. We enjoy family activities like camping and fishing on weekends. My wife makes excellent meatloaf every Sunday after church services. I checked Pete's personnel file. He was single. No kids. Had been divorced for 5 years and lived alone in a trailer outside Fairbanks. The interviews became increasingly surreal. Danny, who used to stutter so badly he could barely complete sentences, now spoke with perfect fluency, but using the exact same words as Jim and Pete. Carlos, who barely spoke English and usually needed a translator for safety meetings, now spoke in perfect, unaccented English, meek, but with the same scripted responses. Frank, who had a thick Boston accent from his childhood, now sounded identical to all the others. 8 different men, with completely different backgrounds, different ages, different family situations, all giving me the same personal history. They described identical childhood memories, identical hobbies, identical weekend plans. Same vocabulary, same mannerisms, same facial expressions, same head movements. But as I continued the interviews, something even more disturbing became apparent. They weren't just giving the same answers, they were developing the same physical features. Subtle at first, but undeniable. Their faces were becoming more similar. Same bone structure, same eye color, same skin tone. Jim's hair was turning the same shade of brown as Pete's. Carlos's face was narrowing to match the others. Linda, I said after completing all 8 interviews, I need to see where they're working. I need to see these new chambers. She looked terrified. That's down in level 3. That's where it all started. Then that's where we're going. Linda led me to the mine elevator, an old cage system that dropped us 300 feet underground. The metal groaned and complained as we descended, and I could feel the temperature dropping degree by degree. My breath began to fog, and the air tasted metallic. The walls changed from reinforced concrete to natural rock, then to something else entirely. Level 3 was unlike anything I'd seen in my career. Instead of the square-cut tunnels I expected, we entered vast natural caverns that stretched beyond the reach of our flashlights. The walls were covered with formations that looked more organic than mineral, twisted, branch-like structures that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, like crystallized tissue or fossilized organs, but somehow still alive. These chambers weren't on the original mine blueprints, Linda explained, her voice echoing strangely in the space. We discovered them 3 weeks ago during excavation. The formations you're seeing, the workers have been extracting them. They're unlike anything in geological surveys. They seem to be worth more than gold, but I don't know what they are exactly. I examined the crystal formations more closely with my flashlight. They had a translucent quality, almost like amber, but with veins running through them that looked disturbingly like blood vessels. When I moved my light across them, they seemed to pulse in response, growing brighter and dimmer in rhythm with something I couldn't identify. The workers spend most of their time down here now, Linda continued. 8-hour shifts in these chambers. That's when their behavior started changing. As we moved deeper into the caverns, I noticed the air quality felt different. My portable monitor was registering normal oxygen levels, but there was something else. A sweet, cloying smell that reminded me of overripe fruit or decaying flowers. It made my head feel light, made my thoughts seem fuzzy around the edges. That's when I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Workers Danny and Mike were crouched near a wall, carefully extracting crystals with hand tools, but instead of putting them in collection bags, they were eating them, biting directly into the formations like they were candy. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sharp with authority. "What are you doing? That's a serious safety violation." Danny looked up with that same mechanical smile. Up close, I could see that his face had changed even more, dramatically. His features were becoming identical to Jim's, to Pete's, to all the others. "Tastes like home cooking," he said, offering me a piece of the crystalline formation. "Would you like to try some, Safety Inspector? It helps with workplace efficiency." I watched in horror as the crystal dissolved on contact with his saliva, seeming to absorb directly into his bloodstream. His pupils dilated for just a moment, then returned to normal. But something else happened. For just an instant, I saw a flicker of the real Danny in his eyes. Terror. Desperate, screaming terror trapped behind that mechanical smile. "Linda, how long has this been going on?" I tried a small piece myself last week," she admitted, and I noticed her voice was starting to take on that same flat inflection. I wanted to understand what was happening to my workers. It made me feel more connected to the team, more unified, less alone. I was starting to understand. The organic minerals weren't just affecting the workers' behavior. They were somehow standardizing their consciousness, their personalities, even their physical appearance. But there was something else, Trishan, something that made this worse than simple mind control. "Linda, I need to see the worker medical records. All of them. Right now." Back in Linda's office, I reviewed the files with growing dread. Brain scans from the workers' annual physicals showed something that should have been impossible. 8 different men now had identical neural patterns. Not similar, DL identical. The same brain structure, the same electrical activity, the same patterns of neural connectivity. Like looking at 8 copies of the same scan. But the medical records revealed something even more disturbing. Blood tests showed that the workers' DNA was changing. Genetic markers that had been different just months ago were now identical across all 8 men. Whatever the crystals were doing, they were rewriting the workers at a cellular level, making them into literal copies of each other. My phone had no signal 300 feet underground, and the mine's communication system was malfunctioning. I couldn't call for backup or report what I was seeing to my supervisors. I was documenting everything with my camera when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Synchronized footsteps. 8 sets of boots hitting the floor in perfect rhythm. All 8 workers appeared in the doorway, moving in perfect formation like soldiers on parade. But soldiers have individual variations in their movement. These men moved like parts of a single organism. "Join the efficiency," they said in unison, their voices creating an eerie harmonic resonance. "Share the harmony, become unified." They stepped into the office, surrounding my chair. Each one held handfuls of the crystalline formations, the organic crystals pulsing with that strange inner light. "Safety Inspector will improve with standardization," they continued, their synchronized voices echoing off the walls. "Individual thinking creates workplace accidents. Unity ensures perfect safety. Singular consciousness eliminates human error." I stood up, backing toward the window, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Stay away from me. This is a serious violation of workplace safety protocols." But they moved closer, extending their hands with the crystals. Linda stepped forward too, and I saw that same mechanical smile spreading across her face like an infection. "Efficiency requires your participation, Safety Inspector," she said, her voice now matching the others exactly. "The entity requires growth. The collective requires expansion." And that's when I understood the real horror of what I was facing. This wasn't just about workplace conformity or corporate mind control. Something ancient had been sleeping in those caves, something that had been waiting for human contact. The crystals weren't just changing the fake workers. They were feeding something that grew stronger with each mind it absorbed. The workers reached for me, trying to force the crystals toward my mouth. I fought back, knocking their hands away, but they moved with perfect coordination. 8 bodies acting as one mind, anticipating my every move because they were all thinking the exact same thoughts. I grabbed my camera and swung it at the nearest worker, the flash firing as it connected. The bright light made them all recoil simultaneously, giving me a chance to break free. I ran for the mine exit, but they followed in formation, their footsteps echoing in perfect rhythm behind me. As I ran through the tunnels toward the elevator, I could hear something else following us. Something larger, moving through the rock itself. The ancient thing that lived in those crystals was stirring, awakened by the disturbance. I made it to the elevator and frantically pressed the button for surface level. As the cage rose, I looked down and saw all 8 workers in the shaft below, moving in perfect unison like a coordinated organism. But behind them, the walls themselves seemed to be moving, pulsing with that same organic light. When I reached the surface, I ran for my truck. But in the rearview mirror, I could see the workers emerging from the mine entrance. They weren't running, they were walking in perfect synchronization, and somehow that was more terrifying than if they had been chasing me. I drove to the nearest gas station 50 miles away and used the payphone to call my supervisor. But when I came out of the phone booth, Linda was sitting in the passenger seat of my truck. "How did you get here so fast?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect the answer. She turned toward me with that identical smile I'd seen on all the workers, but now I could see something else in her eyes. The same trapped terror I'd glimpsed in Danny. The real Linda was still in there somewhere, screaming, silently, while something else controlled her body. "Efficiency requires your participation, Safety Inspector," she said in that flat, mechanical tone. "Individual thinking creates workplace accidents. Unity ensures perfect safety. The entity must feed. The collective must grow." I realized she'd consumed enough of those crystals to join whatever hive mind had taken over the mine. And now I was trapped in a truck with another copy of the same entity. But as I sat there staring at what had once been Linda, I felt something that terrified me more than anything else that had happened. For just a moment, the idea of joining them didn't seem horrible. The thought of never having to make difficult decisions alone, never having to worry about job security or career advancement, never having to feel isolated or misunderstood, it seemed almost appealing. That moment of temptation showed me how the entity had spread so quickly. It offered something that people desperately wanted: perfect belonging, complete understanding, absolute unity. No more loneliness, no more conflict, no more individual suffering. But the price was everything that made us human. I managed to get out of the truck and commandeer another vehicle from a terrified gas station attendant. I drove straight to the State Safety Division headquarters and submitted my report, including all the photographs and medical records I'd collected. The response was exactly what I'd feared. My supervisor scheduled me for immediate psychological evaluation. The official investigation found no evidence of safety violations at Goldstream Mine. The workers tested clean for drugs, showed no signs of mental illness, and passed all safety inspections with perfect scores. But I know what I saw down in those chambers. The mine is still operating. Linda still owns it, or the thing wearing her face does. And 8 identical workers continue extracting those organic crystals from the walls, feeding the ancient entity that sleeps in the rock. The really terrifying part? The mine has started hiring new workers. Day by day, the collective is growing. And each new worker means the entity becomes stronger, more capable of spreading beyond the confines of the mine. Sometimes I drive past the mine on my way to other inspections just to monitor the situation. The workers wave at me from the parking lot, all of them, moving in perfect synchronization, smiling the same smile, but now there are 12 of them, then 15, then 20. And sometimes, late at night, when the loneliness and job stress become overwhelming, I find myself wondering what it would be like to not have to think for myself anymore, to be part of something larger, more efficient, more unified, to never feel alone or misunderstood again. Then I remember the trapped terror in Danny's eyes, the real Linda screaming silently behind that mechanical smile, and I know the truth. The entity doesn't eliminate suffering. It just hides it behind perfect synchronized smiles while it feeds on human consciousness. I've requested a transfer to another state. My supervisor approved it, probably hoping I'll forget about Goldstream Mine. But wherever I go, I'll always be looking over my shoulder, watching for that identical smile, listening for synchronized footsteps. Because some workplace hazards can't be prevented with safety equipment. Some dangers have been waiting in the ground since before humans walked the earth. And some violations of human safety go way beyond anything covered in any manual. The crystals are still down there, waiting. The entity is still hungry for more unity, more efficiency, more perfect workplace safety. And somewhere in Alaska, there's a mine full of workers who all share the same smile, the same thoughts, the same terrible secret. If you ever work in Alaska's mining industry, and you encounter organic crystal formations that seem to pulse with their own light, run. Don't try to study them, don't try to extract them, and whatever you do, don't taste them. Because once you join the collective, the real you becomes nothing more than a passenger in your own body, screaming silently while something ancient and hungry wears your face and speaks with your voice. And that's a kind of workplace accident that no safety inspector can prevent. My name is Dave Patterson, and I need to tell someone what really happened at Black Rock Mine before I lose my mind completely. The company paid me $50,000 to sign papers, saying I'd never talk about this, but money doesn't fix what I saw. Money doesn't stop the nightmares. I've been a heavy equipment mechanic for 11 years. Started at 18, fixing snow plows for the state highway department, worked my way up to mining equipment because that's where the real money is. Remote sites pay triple wages, $800 a day, plus expenses, because most mechanics won't drive into the middle of nowhere to change hydraulic fluid on a machine worth more than most people's houses. I loved the isolation though. No supervisors breathing down your neck, no rush hour traffic, just you and the machine and whatever's wrong with it. I could diagnose a failing transmission by the sound it made, spot a hydraulic leak from 50 yards away. My toolbox was my pride, every socket, every wrench organized exactly how I needed it. I was good at my job. Best mechanic Mountain Equipment Services ever had, according to my supervisor. But after what happened at Black Rock Mine last October, I can't even look at my tools without shaking. I keep them locked in my garage now, but sometimes I hear them moving around in there at night, arranging themselves, getting ready. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, October 15th. My dispatcher Sandy sounded stressed when she radioed me at home. "Dave, we got an emergency up at Black Rock Mine near Chicken. Their main excavator's been malfunctioning for 3 days straight. They're losing $20,000 a day with that machine down." I knew the area, deep wilderness, about 4 hours north of Fairbanks. Never worked that particular site before, but the money was good and I had nothing else scheduled. "What kind of malfunction?" I asked. "Hydraulic problems, they think. Machine keeps starting itself up and digging in the wrong places." Supervisor sounds pretty rattled. Equipment doesn't start itself, but stranger things happen with electrical systems in cold weather. I loaded up my service truck with the usual gear: diagnostic computers, hydraulic testers, spare parts for the most common failures. Threw in some extra oil and coolant since remote sites always run low on fluids. The drive started normal enough. Clear skies, temperature around 40 degrees, NET number, perfect working weather. I had my radio tuned to the company frequency, checking in every hour like policy required. Mile markers ticked by as highway gave way to gravel road, then to a narrow dirt track winding through thick forest. About 30 miles from the mine site, I started noticing things. First, there were no birds. The forest had been full of ravens and jays when I started up the mountain, but suddenly it was silent except for my engine noise. Then my radio went quiet, not static, just dead air, like someone had turned off every repeater tower in Alaska. But the really weird thing was the trees. They were carved. Not obviously at first, just scratches in the bark that looked like natural damage from weather or animals. But as I drove deeper into the forest, the markings became more deliberate. Symbols carved into pine trunks in groups of 4 parallel lines. Always 4. Always the same depth and spacing. I stopped the truck and got out to examine one of the marked trees. The cuts were deep, going through bark into the heartwood, but they were too clean for claws, too precise for any tool I recognized. And they were fresh, sap still bleeding from the wounds. Something in those mountains was marking territory. I radioed base to report the strange markings, but got no response, not even static. My GPS still worked, showing me exactly where I was, but the radio was completely dead. Company policy said to turn around if communication failed, but I was already 3 hours into the drive and the client was paying emergency rates. I decided to push on. 20 minutes later, I reached the Black Rock Mine gate. The place looked like a ghost town. Chain link fence with razor wire, guard shack with windows boarded up, warning signs posted everywhere: danger, unstable ground and authorized personnel only, and no trespassing, violators prosecuted. But weirdest of all, the gate was wide open and nobody was watching it. I honked my horn and waited. After about 5 minutes, a man came running out from behind one of the buildings. Thin, nervous-looking guy in his 50s wearing a supervisor's hard hat. His name tag said, Jake Morrison, site manager. "Thank God you're here," he said, jogging up to my truck window. "We really need that excavator fixed." "Where is everyone?" I asked, looking around at the empty site. "This place looks abandoned." "Sent most of the crew home early. Safety precaution." Jake kept glancing at the empty forest, like he expected something to come charging out. "The machine's been acting up for 3 days now, starting itself, digging holes all over the site. Last night it dug so deep it hit an old mine shaft from the 1,920 seconds. That got my attention. Equipment doesn't start itself. Someone's got to turn the key or bypass the ignition." "That's what I thought too. Follow me, I'll show you." We drove through the mine site in convoy, Jake's pickup leading, my service truck behind. Standard mining setup with equipment yards, fuel tanks, a few trailer offices. But I noticed details that didn't add up. Fresh tire tracks everywhere, but no workers. Lights on in the buildings, but no movement inside. And strangest of all, there were those same 4-line markings carved into every wooden structure: fence posts, building, siding, even the fuel tank supports. "Jake," I called out my window when we stopped at a red light near the main office. "What made those scratches on your mall? Buildings?" "Bears," he said quickly. "Lots of bears around here, really aggressive ones." But I'd seen bear damage before. This wasn't bear damage. We drove about 100 yards past the main facilities to where the excavator sat, parked near the tree line. It was a massive Cat 345, 50 tons of steel and hydraulics, worth $750,000. Should have been working one of the dig sites, not sitting idle with the bucket resting on the ground. I parked next to the machine and grabbed my diagnostic equipment. That's when I got my first real look at the damage. The entire left side of the excavator was covered in those 4-line scratches, but these were deep gouged right through 1/4-inch steel plating, like someone had used an industrial cutting torch. The scratches covered the cab, the engine compartment, the hydraulic cylinders. Hundreds of them, all in groups of 4, all the same spacing. "Jesus Christ, Jake, what kind of bears do you have? Up here?" Jake was standing about 20 feet away, scanning the forest nervously. "Just fix the hydraulics, okay? That's all we need." I walked around the machine, documenting the damage with my phone. The scratches weren't random. They followed the hydraulic lines and electrical conduits, like someone had been trying to trace the machine's circulatory system. Someone with claws. But the really disturbing thing was what I found inside the engine compartment. The hydraulic reservoir had been opened, not unscrewed, but pried open with something sharp. The fluid was gone, replaced with a thick, dark liquid that smelled like rotting meat. All the electrical connections had been pulled apart and rewired using what looked like sinew and strips of dried skin. "Jake, you need to see this," I called out. He came over reluctantly and looked where I was pointing. His face went white. "They've been trying to fix it," he whispered. "They?" "The previous crew. Before we took over this site. They went missing 6 months ago." I stared at the organic wiring. "Missing how?" "Search and rescue found their camp 2 miles into the forest. Tents shredded, equipment scattered, but no bodies. Just blood and these scratch marks on everything." Jake was shaking now. Company said it was a bear attack, but the scratches were in places bears can't reach. 30 feet up in the trees. Inside sealed buildings. I closed the engine compartment and started unpacking my diagnostic gear. Whatever had happened to the previous crew, I had a job to do. But as I worked, I started noticing things that made my skin crawl. First, my tools kept moving. I'd set my socket wrench down on the machine's track housing, turn away for 30 seconds to grab another tool, and when I looked back, the wrench would be 15 feet away, balanced on a boulder. At first, I thought I was misremembering where I'd put things, but it kept happening. Tools disappearing and reappearing in impossible places. Then I noticed I was being watched. Something in the forest, about 60 yards out, moving between the trees. Tall and pale, with arms that hung too low. Every time I looked directly at it, it would freeze like a deer in headlights. But in my peripheral vision, I could see it moving, studying my every action. And it was copying me. When I raised my hydraulic tester to check a fitting, the pale figure raised something long and thin. When I ducked under the boom to examine a cylinder, it crouched behind a tree. When I tapped my wrench against a metal housing to test for loose bolts, I heard tapping sounds echo back from the forest. "Jake, something's out there watching us," I said. "I know. They've been watching for months. Learning." "Learning what?" "How we work. How we fix things." I tried to focus on the excavator, but the mimicking behavior was getting more obvious and more disturbing. The pale watcher was joined by others, maybe 6 or 7 figures, moving through the trees, all copying my movements in perfect synchronization. That's when I made the connection. The organic rewiring in the engine compartment, the precise scratches following hydraulic lines, the way the equipment had been malfunctioning, starting itself and digging. Something had been trying to repair the excavator using biological logic. "Jake, what exactly happened to the previous crew?" The official report said bear attack, but he looked around to make sure we were alone. One of the search and rescue guys told me off the record what they really found. The crew's tools were arranged in geometric patterns around their campsite. Perfect triangles and circles made from wrenches and screwdrivers. And there were crude copies made from bone and stone scattered around, hammers carved from elk antlers, screwdrivers made from sharpened leg bones. My blood went cold. Copies of their tools? Like something had been studying human equipment and trying to make its own versions. I looked back at the forest. The pale watchers were closer now, maybe 40 yards out, and they were holding things, crude imitations of my tools made from organic materials. Bone hammers, stone scrapers, what looked like entire rib cages fashioned into socket sets. They'd been watching me work for the past hour, learning my repair techniques, making mental notes of every tool I used. "We need to leave," I said, "right now." But Jake was backing away from me, eyes wide with terror. "Look at your tools." I turned around and saw something that made my knees buckle. My entire tool set had been arranged in a perfect spiral pattern on the ground around the excavator. Every socket, every wrench, every screwdriver positioned with mathematical precision, but I hadn't moved them. I'd been focused on the engine compartment the whole time. And in the center of the spiral was something that hadn't been there before. A skull. Human skull. With 4-inch holes punched through the temple, perfectly spaced like claw marks. "That's Tommy Nyan," Jake whispered. He was the lead mechanic for the previous crew. The pale watchers were moving closer, emerging from the forest in a coordinated group. 7 of them, all tall and gaunt with skin stretched tight over elongated skulls. Their eyes were completely black and too large for their faces. 4 fingers on each hand, ending in claws that could definitely punch through bone. But the most disturbing thing was their behavior. They moved like mechanics. One carried what looked like a diagnostic computer made from a hollowed-out torso. Another held hydraulic testers carved from arm bones. They approached the excavator with the purposeful gait of professionals coming to work. The lead entity, the tallest one, made a clicking sound like metal on metal, almost like my impact wrench. When I didn't respond, it clicked again, holding up its bone hammer in a gesture I recognized. It wanted to help with the repair. "They think machines are alive," Jake said, his voice barely audible. "Like animals. They've been trying to heal our equipment the way they'd treat wounded creatures." The entities began working on the excavator, but their methods were horrifying. They opened the hydraulic lines and began transfusing what looked like blood from organic bladders. They connected nerve-like tendrils to the electrical system. They packed the engine compartment with what appeared to be organs, kidneys, livers, hearts, all still pulsing with life. And the excavator responded. The engine started with a sound like breathing. The hydraulic cylinders moved with muscular contractions instead of fluid pressure. The bucket curled and flexed like a giant hand testing its strength. They're converting it, I realized, making it biological so they can understand how to maintain it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when they turned to me. The lead entity approached slowly, offering its bone hammer. Up close, I could see that its skin wasn't skin at all. It was tanned human leather stitched together with sinew. Its tool collection wasn't carved from elk antlers. It was carved from human bones. Tommy Nguyen's bones. And the bones of 6 other mechanics who'd made the mistake of teaching these things how to work on machinery. The entity clicked at me again, more insistently this time. It wanted me to take the bone hammer. It wanted to add my knowledge to its collection. I backed away slowly, but there was nowhere to run. The entities had surrounded the work area. Jake was gone. I could see his pickup truck driving away in the distance, abandoning me to save himself. The bone hammer was warm in the entity's claws, pulsing with a heartbeat that wasn't its own. When it pressed the tool into my hand, I felt something terrible happen. Memories flooded my mind. Tommy Nguyen's memories. His 11 years of experience working on heavy equipment. Every hydraulic system he'd ever repaired. Every electrical problem he'd ever solved. But underneath his professional knowledge was something else. Screaming. Endless screaming, as these things had slowly carved away his expertise along with his flesh. The bone tools were memory storage devices. They contained the accumulated knowledge of every mechanic these entities had captured and converted. And now they wanted mine. I dropped the bone hammer and ran for my truck, but when I reached for the door handle, I saw that my service vehicle was changing. The metal was becoming soft and warm. Blood vessels were spreading across the hood like a circulatory system. The engine was growing organs. My truck was being converted into something biological, something these entities could understand and maintain. I climbed into the cab, but the steering wheel felt like flesh under my hands. The dashboard was showing biological readings. ICU, heart rate, blood pressure, neural activity. My truck wasn't just alive now, it was conscious. And it was in pain. The radio crackled to life, but instead of dispatcher chatter, I heard screaming. Tommy Nguyen's voice and 6 others, all trapped inside the converted machinery, all begging for death. "Help us. Help us," Tommy's voice came through the speakers. "We're still alive in here. We're still conscious. They keep us conscious while they use our knowledge." I gunned the engine and drove away from Blackrock Mine as fast as the biological truck would carry me. But the entities didn't chase me. They just watched me go, clicking their satisfaction. They'd gotten what they wanted. My truck was converted now. My tools were contaminated, and somewhere in my mind, I could feel Tommy Nguyen's memories starting to merge with my own. I made it back to Fairbanks, but barely. The truck died in the company parking lot, its biological components finally failing. Mountain Equipment Services wrote it off as extreme environmental damage, and insurance paid out without questions. Jake Morrison was transferred to another site and signed the same non-disclosure agreement I did. The company sealed Blackrock Mine due to unstable geological conditions and posted federal no trespassing signs around the entire area. But it's not over. Every night I dream about the entities, and every morning I wake up knowing things I didn't know before. Advanced hydraulic theory that's decades beyond current technology. Electrical engineering principles that shouldn't exist. Tommy Nguyen's knowledge is becoming my knowledge, and I can feel the others in there too. 7 mechanics worth of expertise crowding into my head. My tools move by themselves now. I'll come out to the garage in the morning and find them arranged in those geometric patterns. Geometric, spirals and triangles and symbols I don't recognize but somehow understand. They're trying to teach me something, trying to prepare me for when the entities come to collect their newest edition. Because they are coming, I can feel them getting closer every night. Sometimes I catch myself staring at machines and seeing them the way the entities do, not as mechanical devices, but as sleeping animals that need to be awakened. Living creatures that can be healed and improved through biological integration. Last week, I found myself standing in the garage at 3 a.m. with a bone saw in my hand, contemplating how I could repair my new truck by giving it a proper circulatory system. The entity knowledge is taking over. I'm telling this story now because I don't have much time left. Soon, I'll be thinking like them, seeing like them, understanding machinery the way they do. And then I'll probably head back to Blackrock Mine to join the others. To anyone reading this, 2-4, stay away from remote mining sites in Alaska. If you see scratch marks in groups of 4, if your tools start moving by themselves, if you feel like something's watching you work, run. Don't try to finish the job. Don't let professional pride keep you there. Because once they learn from you, Once they add your knowledge to their collection, you become part of the machinery forever. Conscious and screaming, and never allowed to die. The entities are still out there, still learning, still converting equipment and mechanics into their biological technology. The mining companies know, but they cover it up because the alternative, admitting that something in the Alaska wilderness is systematically hunting skilled workers, TBC, would destroy the industry. How many more mechanics have they taken since Tommy Nguyen? How many more are trapped inside converted machinery, forced to operate equipment made from their own bones? I can hear my tools moving around in the garage right now, arranging themselves into the pattern they want, getting ready for tomorrow night when I'll walk out there and finally understand what they're trying to tell me. When I'll become part of the machinery myself.